I wasn't supposed to be home. That's the thing. It was a normal workday, nothing unusual, no reason for me to leave early, but something felt wrong. You know that gut feeling that gnaws at you, like a splinter you can't find? That's what I felt the entire day. Around lunchtime, I couldn't shake it. So, I told my boss I wasn't feeling well, packed up, and headed home. I pulled into the driveway, noticing everything was still and calm. Jenny's car was in the driveway. I paused for a moment, wondering why she wasn't at her usual afternoon yoga class. We'd been together for so long that I knew her routine better than my own. But today was different. As I approached the front door, I could hear faint laughter, Jenny's voice mingled with someone else's. Megan, her best friend. They were talking, sitting comfortably at the kitchen table, just a few feet away from where I now stood in the hallway, hidden from sight. The air was light, casual, until Jenny's voice took on a strange, secretive tone. My breath caught in my throat as I heard her say, "Damn, he has such a big penis, way bigger than my husband's. And the best part? He's loaded." I froze. My heart pounded, a dull roar in my ears as my mind tried to make sense of what I'd just heard. Surely I misunderstood. Maybe it was some kind of sick joke. But her next words shattered any hope I had that it wasn't real. Megan laughed softly. "Are you thinking of leaving him?" she asked, her tone nonchalant, as though they were discussing a change in hair color, not a marriage. "I don't know," Jenny replied. "I think so. But I don't know what to say to him. I mean, we've been together for so long, but Paul, he's different. He makes me feel alive." My stomach turned and I felt like I might be sick. The name echoed in my head. I didn't know a Paul. Who the hell was this guy? How long had this been going on? My legs were locked in place, my entire body tense, as if moving would somehow make it worse. I should have stormed in there, demanded an explanation, screamed, anything. But I couldn't. Instead, I slowly backed away from the door, slipping out as quietly as I had entered. I needed air. I needed to think. My thoughts raced as I got back in the car and drove aimlessly through the neighborhood. What had just happened? Jenny, my wife of 8 years, was talking about another man, a man she was clearly sleeping with. How could she do this? How could she act so normal as if nothing was wrong? I pulled into a park a few blocks away and sat there, staring at the dashboard, replaying the words I had heard over and over again. It didn't make sense. We were happy, weren't we? Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but this felt like a nightmare. I looked at my watch. An hour had passed, but it felt like seconds and an eternity all at once. I didn't know what to do. Confronting her seemed impossible. What would I even say? "Hey, I overheard you telling your best friend about the guy you're screwing. Care to explain?" My heart ached, a deep, hollow pain I'd never felt before. The betrayal was crushing. Every memory of our time together was now tainted by the image of her with someone else. I could see her in my mind, lying to my face, pretending everything was fine, while she was having an affair behind my back. How many times had she kissed me with his touch still fresh on her skin? The thought was too much to bear. After a while, I knew I couldn't avoid going back home. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I needed to collect myself, to figure out what I was going to do. So I drove back, pulling into the driveway as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just heard my entire life fall apart. When I walked through the door, they were still there, Jenny and Megan, laughing like old times, like I hadn't just overheard the most devastating conversation of my life. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile as Jenny looked up and greeted me. "Hey, babe," she chirped, standing up to kiss me on the lips as though everything was fine. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to stop this charade, but I couldn't. Not yet. I kissed her back, trying to suppress the bile rising in my throat. "How was work?" she asked innocently, her eyes bright, completely devoid of guilt. "It made me sick." "Exhausting," I replied, my voice more strained than I intended. "I'm beat." Megan smiled at me. "Hey, how's it going? You're home early, huh?" "Yeah," I muttered, forcing myself to meet her gaze. I wondered if she knew the full extent of it, if she was in on Jenny's little secret or just a sounding board for her dirty laundry. The way she looked at me, casual, friendly, gave no indication that she knew the depth of what I had overheard. Well, I'll leave you guys to it, Megan said, gathering her things and standing up. She gave Jenny a knowing look before turning back to me. Take care. You too, I replied numbly, watching as she left the house, the door clicking shut behind her. I was alone with Jenny now, my mind still reeling from what I had heard. She walked over to me, wrapping her arms around my waist, resting her head on my chest. I missed you today, she said softly, her breath warm against my skin. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just stood there, holding her, pretending that my world hadn't just been torn apart. The following days passed in a haze. I went through the motions of daily life, but inside, I was hollow. Every glance Jenny threw my way felt like an accusation, though I knew she had no idea I had overheard her. She went on with her routine, cooking dinner, asking me about my day, kissing me goodnight, like nothing had changed. But to me, everything had. I couldn't look at her without imagining her with Paul. Who was he? What did he look like? What did he have that I didn't? The questions burned in my mind, but I said nothing. I played the role of the oblivious husband, smiling when she smiled, pretending to be tired when I couldn't stand the thought of being close to her. In those first few days, I didn't confront her. I needed more time. Time to plan. Time to figure out how I would handle this. But each moment I spent around her, knowing what I knew, felt like torture. She seemed none the wiser, carrying on as usual. If anything, she was more affectionate than usual. She kissed me when I got home, asked if I wanted to join her on the couch to watch TV, and even suggested we take a weekend trip somewhere. Maybe we could go up to the cabin? She asked one evening, her voice soft and eager, her smile wide as she curled up beside me. We haven't been in a while. It could be nice to get away. I stared at her for a moment, wondering how she could sit there, acting like everything was perfect, after the conversation I had overheard. I forced a smile and nodded. Yeah, that sounds good. We could use some time away. She beamed, leaning over to kiss me, and I kissed her back, but it felt empty. The thought of going to the cabin with her, somewhere that had always been our peaceful escape, made my stomach turn. How could I pretend everything was okay in such an intimate place when everything between us was a lie? But I couldn't let her know I was onto her. Not yet. I needed time to gather evidence, to make sure I had everything I needed when the time came to confront her. That night, after Jenny had fallen asleep, I snuck out of bed and tiptoed downstairs. I grabbed her phone from the counter, praying she hadn't changed her passcode. When the screen lit up, it unlocked immediately. Relief flooded through me. I sat down at the kitchen table, scrolling through her messages, my heart pounding in my chest. It didn't take long to find him, Paul. The conversation between them was hidden under a generic contact name, Trainer Paul. My blood ran cold as I read through their messages, which started out innocent enough but quickly grew intimate. Late-night texts, plans to meet while I was at work, compliments about her body, pictures. Then I saw the worst of it. Paul, God, I can't stop thinking about you. That night was amazing. Jenny, you always know just how to make me feel so good. I can't wait to see you again. When's the next time you're free? Paul, next week. How's Thursday while your husband's at work? Jenny, perfect. I'll tell him I'm going to the gym. I had to stop reading. My hands were trembling and I felt sick. They were meeting while I was at work, lying to my face about going to the gym. Every part of me wanted to scream, to go upstairs and drag her out of bed, demanding answers. But I couldn't. Not yet. This wasn't enough. I needed something more. Shutting off the phone, I placed it back exactly where I'd found it, then sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the darkness outside the window. My mind was racing. How long had this been going on? Were there other men before Paul? Was she ever going to tell me the truth? Or had she planned on continuing this charade forever? The next morning, Jenny woke up cheerful and full of energy, none the wiser to my sleepless night of torment. She kissed me before work, the same way she always did, but this time, it felt even more hollow than before. I'll see you tonight, she said, her voice light and carefree. It was all I could do to nod. I spent the day in a daze, pretending to be focused on work while my mind spiraled out of control. The image of her with Paul haunted me, the texts playing on repeat in my head. The anger was building inside me, threatening to boil over, but I kept it contained. Not yet. Not until I had a solid plan. After work, I returned home to find her in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she prepared dinner. It was a familiar scene, one I had witnessed countless times before, but now it felt tainted. I watched her for a moment, wondering how she could act so normal when she had been betraying me all this time. "Hey," she greeted me with a smile, wiping her hands on a towel as she approached. "Dinner's almost ready. How was work?" "It was fine," I replied, my voice tight. "How was your day?" She shrugged, coming over to kiss me on the cheek. "Good." Megan came over again for lunch. She's going through a rough time with her boyfriend, so we talked for a while. I stiffened at the mention of Megan. She had been there when I overheard Jenny talk about Paul. She knew. She had to know. The fact that Jenny was still confiding in her made me sick. "Oh," I said, forcing a casual tone. "What's going on with her boyfriend?" Jenny waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you know how Megan is. Always falling for the wrong guys. I keep telling her to stop dating losers." The irony of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to scream. I had to play along just a little longer. We sat down to dinner, the conversation flowing as it always did, but I barely heard a word she said. My mind was too busy spinning, trying to figure out what my next move would be. She was so calm, so at ease, completely unaware that I knew everything. Part of me wondered if she ever thought about the consequences, if she ever imagined what would happen if I found out. Did she think she was untouchable? That I'd never catch on? That night, as we lay in bed, her hand slipped across my chest, a subtle invitation. For the first time in weeks, I felt a wave of disgust roll over me. How could she touch me like that when she had been with another man? I turned away, pretending to be too tired. She didn't press further, but I could feel her frustration hanging in the air. "Good night," she whispered softly, turning off the bedside lamp. "Good night," I replied, my voice strained. As soon as she fell asleep, I slipped out of bed again, my mind racing with the weight of what I had to do next. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up the charade. Each day that passed felt like I was living a double life, acting like the loving husband while inside I was breaking apart. I had never been good at hiding my emotions, and I wondered how Jenny hadn't noticed the shift in me. Maybe she was too caught up in her own lies to see the truth in front of her. At work, I could hardly focus. My mind drifted, consumed with thoughts of Jenny and Paul, with their lies and betrayals. I had to get out of this fog, had to take control. Pretending everything was fine only made the anger grow inside me, like a poison slowly seeping into every part of my being. The gym. That's where she said she would meet him. The place she had been lying about for God knows how long. I had never been suspicious before, but now, every workout she claimed to have seemed like an obvious alibi. It was my next move, and I had to be smart. Thursday rolled around, and Jenny mentioned going to the gym that evening. It was my chance. I acted as though nothing was out of the ordinary, playing the part of the husband who trusted her without question. I kissed her goodbye as she left, watching from the window as she drove away. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands slick with sweat as I thought about what I was about to do. I grabbed my keys and left the house shortly after her. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I couldn't sit idly by any longer. I needed to see it for myself, to confirm what I already knew deep down. Following her wasn't hard. She had mentioned her gym countless times, so I knew the route well. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me, my mind racing with scenarios of what I might find. When I arrived at the gym, I parked a few cars away from hers. My heart hammered in my chest as I scanned the parking lot. Was Paul already here? Or was he meeting her inside? I sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering my courage. Then I got out, walking toward the entrance with my head low, trying not to draw attention. The gym was packed, people bustling in and out, everyone in their own world. I stepped inside, scanning the room for any sign of her. It didn't take long to spot her, sitting on a bench near the weights. She wasn't alone. A man stood next to her, tall, muscular, and confident. He had the kind of physique you'd expect from a personal trainer, and the way they were standing close to each other made it obvious they weren't just casually talking. Well, this had to be him. They weren't touching, but the chemistry between them was undeniable. Jenny was smiling up at him, her body language open and relaxed, like she was completely comfortable in his presence. My stomach churned with anger and disgust. It was one thing to read their messages, but seeing it in person, watching her laugh and flirt with him, was too much. I backed away, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I had to get out of there before I lost control. I stumbled outside, the fresh air hitting me like a slap in the face. Leaning against my car, I tried to steady myself. What had happened to my marriage? To the woman I thought I knew? I couldn't confront her here. Not in the middle of a public gym. But the sight of them together had solidified what I needed to do. I had been patient long enough, played the fool long enough. It was time to end this. That night, Jenny came home late, her face flushed and glowing as she walked through the door. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, though I hadn't been able to focus on the screen for more than a few seconds at a time. "Hey, babe," she called out cheerfully, tossing her gym bag onto the floor. "Sorry I'm late. I got caught up talking to my trainer after class." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Talking to her trainer. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, though it felt like I was going to explode. "That's fine," I replied, my voice tight. "How was your workout?" "It was great," she said, walking over to me with a bright smile. She leaned down to kiss me, but I turned my head slightly, letting her kiss land on my cheek instead. She pulled back, frowning. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Long day at work." She stared at me for a moment as if trying to read my mood, but then shrugged it off and headed to the kitchen. "I'll heat up some dinner," she called over her shoulder. I watched her walk away, my heart heavy with the weight of everything I had seen. The image of her and Paul together was burned into my mind, and I knew I couldn't keep up this act much longer. But I needed to be sure of one thing before I confronted her. I needed undeniable proof. The next day, I called a private investigator. It felt like a drastic step, but I needed concrete evidence of the affair before I could confront Jenny. As much as it killed me to think about them together, I couldn't go into this blindly. I needed something irrefutable, something she couldn't weasel her way out of. The investigator was thorough, asking me for all the details, her gym schedule, the places she frequented, anything that might help track her movements. I provided him with everything I knew, feeling a strange mixture of relief and guilt. I hated that it had come to this, that I was hiring someone to spy on my wife, but what choice did I have? She was already lying to me. The least I could do was uncover the full truth. For the next few days, I tried to act normal, but the weight of the impending confrontation hung over me like a dark cloud. Every time Jenny smiled at me or touched my arm, I wanted to scream at her, to demand she tell me the truth. But I held back, waiting for the investigator's report. When the call finally came, my heart raced as I answered. The investigator's voice was calm, almost clinical, as he explained what he had found. He had followed Jenny after her gym session, trailing her to a hotel on the outskirts of town. There, she met Paul, and they spent the next 2 hours in a room together. Hearing it spoken aloud, so matter-of-factly, was like a punch to the gut. I had suspected it, but now there was no denying it. My wife was cheating on me. "Do you want the photos?" the investigator asked. I swallowed hard. Photos. Evidence. Proof. My mind swirled, but I knew what I had to do. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Send me everything." That night, Jenny came home, just as cheerful as ever, kissing me on the cheek and asking about my day. I couldn't even look at her without feeling sick. She was so good at pretending, so good at making me believe everything was fine. But I wasn't the fool she thought I was. As we sat down for dinner, I watched her, my mind already planning the confrontation. The photos were on my phone, ready to be used when the time came. It wouldn't be long now. Soon, I would lay everything out, and she wouldn't be able to deny it anymore. It was time to end this charade. The confrontation wasn't going to happen over dinner. I knew that now. My patience had worn thin, and I needed more than just words. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to catch her in the act. The investigator's photos were one thing, but part of me needed that personal, undeniable proof, something she couldn't talk her way out of. Jenny had mentioned another gym session that Thursday, the same routine she'd been lying about for weeks. This time, though, I wasn't just going to sit back. I was going to follow her, but I was done being passive. This time, I had a plan. When Thursday rolled around, Jenny left the house with her usual cheerful goodbye, claiming she was heading to the gym again. My stomach churned, but I kept my face neutral, kissing her goodbye like nothing was wrong. Once she was out of sight, I grabbed my phone, the camera equipment I'd borrowed from a friend for work, and slipped out of the house, following her at a safe distance. She drove the familiar route to the gym, but after her session, like clockwork, she made a detour toward the outskirts of town. I followed, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me. My pulse quickened as I saw her car pull into the same hotel where she had met Paul before. I parked a few spots down, waiting. She got out of the car, glancing around casually before walking inside. A few minutes later, Paul's car pulled into the lot. He followed the same path, walking confidently through the doors. This was it. No more doubts. No more pretending. I gave them a few minutes to get settled before I made my move. My hands shook as I stepped out of the car, clutching the camera. I felt like a man on the edge, consumed by anger, hurt, and a need for justice. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to make them pay. The investigator had already told me which room they were using, something he'd figured out after trailing them the last time. I made my way to the room, my heart pounding in my ears. Standing outside the door, I could hear muffled voices, laughter, and then the unmistakable sounds of passion. My stomach twisted, but I pressed on, knowing I had to go through with this. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a card the investigator had given me, a tool to discreetly open the cheap hotel door locks. It clicked open with a quiet snap, and I pushed the door just wide enough to peer inside. There they were, tangled in the sheets, completely unaware of my presence. Jenny was moaning softly, her back arched as Paul moved above her, both of them lost in their own world. I gripped the camera tighter, bile rising in my throat. This was the moment I had dreaded, and yet, some sick part of me was glad I had caught them like this. There was no more hiding. No more lies. Without a word, I stepped into the room, my phone's camera already rolling. I zoomed in on the bed, capturing every sordid detail. Jenny's head was tilted back, eyes closed, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was standing just feet away, recording her infidelity. Paul's hands gripped her waist, his body moving with a rhythm that made my blood boil. I stood there, silently filming for what felt like an eternity, my heart hammering in my chest. Finally, I cleared my throat, my voice low but firm. "Don't stop on my account." They froze. Jenny's eyes flew open, her body going rigid as she realized what was happening. Paul quickly scrambled off her, grabbing for the sheets to cover himself, his face twisted in shock and panic. "What the hell?" Paul started, his voice frantic, but I cut him off with a cold laugh. "Go ahead," I said, holding up my phone. "Give me a good shot for the camera. The world's going to want to see this." Jenny sat up, pulling the covers around her body, her face pale with fear. "Oh my God. This isn't what it looks like." "Don't even bother," I snapped, my voice shaking with rage. "I know exactly what this is. And now I've got proof." Paul stepped forward, his hands raised defensively. "Look, man, we can work this out, okay? Just put the camera down, and let's talk about this." I stared at him, disgusted. "Oh, we're going to work this out, all right. But it's not going to be the way you think." I kept the camera pointed at them, recording every second of their humiliation. "I'm going to make this very simple for you," I continued, my voice cold and calculated. "I've got this whole thing on camera. And unless you want your wife, your friends, and your gym members to see what you've been up to, you're going to do exactly what I say." Paul's face went pale, and he glanced at Jenny, who looked like she was about to burst into tears. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I want you to disappear," I said, my voice hardening. "You're going to leave Jenny alone, quit your job at the gym, and vanish. If I hear one word from either of you, this video goes viral. And trust me, I've got more than enough connections to make that happen." Jenny finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Please don't do this." I turned my gaze to her, feeling nothing but contempt. You made your choice, Jenny. Now you have to live with it. I could see the panic rising in Paul's eyes, his mind racing for a way out. But there wasn't one. He was trapped, just like Jenny. I had them both right where I wanted them. And Paul, I added, stepping closer to him, my voice dripping with malice, I know you've got a wife. How do you think she's going to feel when she sees this? His face crumpled, and I knew I had him. He was broken, terrified of the consequences that would follow if this video got out. Jenny sat on the bed, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't care. This was the price she had to pay. Now get out, I spat, my voice full of venom. Both of you. Paul scrambled to gather his clothes, his hands shaking as he pulled them on. Jenny didn't move, still sitting on the bed, looking completely destroyed. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Paul shot me one last pleading look, but I just raised the phone again, reminding him of the power I held. He slunk out of the room, leaving Jenny and me alone in the silence. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out, leaving her to deal with the mess she had created. I had what I needed: control, proof, and a way to make them both suffer for what they had done to me. And if they didn't play by my rules, the whole world would know. The next few hours were a blur. After walking out of that hotel room, my mind spun with anger and satisfaction. I had finally caught Jenny and Paul in the act. But more than that, I had leverage. The power was in my hands now, and it felt like a twisted sort of justice. For all the lies, all the betrayals, I had something that could ruin them both. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel tightly, the video playing on repeat in my head. The image of them together, her body wrapped around his, the look of panic on their faces when they realized they'd been caught, it was burned into my memory. It should have sickened me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of control. Finally, after weeks of deception, I had the upper hand. When I got home, the house was dark, quiet. I sat down on the couch, staring at my phone, the video still saved in my gallery. Jenny hadn't come back yet, probably too scared to face me. Let her sweat. Let her wonder what I'm going to do. But as the minutes ticked by, my anger started to fester. The initial rush of victory was wearing off, replaced by the raw hurt of betrayal. She had done this to me. She had ruined everything. And for what? Some fling with a man who had muscles and a fat wallet? I thought about the last few weeks, how I had tried to be a good husband, how I had given her everything I could. And still, it hadn't been enough. I heard the front door creak open, and a moment later, Jenny stepped into the living room, her face pale, eyes red from crying. She stood there for a second, looking at me like she didn't know whether to run or beg. "Tom," she began, her voice small, trembling. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, waiting for whatever pathetic excuse she had prepared. She swallowed hard, stepping closer, her hands trembling as she wrung them together. "Please, don't post the video," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, I'll do anything, just don't ruin my life." I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms. "Ruin your life?" I said, my voice cold. "What about mine, Jenny? What about everything you've done to me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she dropped to her knees in front of me, her hands clutching the fabric of my pants. "I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry, Tom. I never meant for this to happen. I was stupid. I didn't think." "You didn't think?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You didn't think while you were screwing Paul in a hotel room? You didn't think while you were lying to my face day after day?" She sobbed, her body shaking as she clung to me. "Please, just listen. I know I've hurt you, I know I've betrayed you, but please don't destroy me. Don't post that video. It'll ruin everything. I'll lose my job, my friends, everything." I grabbed her by the arms, yanking her to her feet, my anger boiling over. "Why did you do it, Jenny? Was I not good enough for you? Was our life together not enough?" My voice cracked with rage as I pushed her back, causing her to stumble into the coffee table. She sobbed harder, her breath hitching as she struggled to find the words. It wasn't just about him," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to explain it." I stepped toward her, the fury burning hotter with each passing second. "Try." I want to hear it from you. Why was he worth throwing our marriage away? Was it the money? Was it his muscles? What was it, Jenny? She hesitated, her lips trembling, and I could see the fear in her eyes. But then, something shifted. She looked down, her face contorted with shame, and she whispered, because you're not enough. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What the hell does that mean? She sobbed harder, covering her face with her hands. It means I wasn't happy. I wasn't satisfied. Not satisfied? I repeated, my voice rising. I've given you everything, Jenny. I've worked my ass off to give you a good life. How dare you say you weren't satisfied? Her voice broke as she continued, tears streaming down her face. It's not just that. It's you, Tom. You're not enough for me physically. I'm sorry, but it's true. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell are you talking about? She looked up at me, her face wet with tears. It's because of your size penis. You're small, Tom. I'm sorry, but it's true. And Paul, he made me feel things that you never could. I stared at her, the words slowly sinking in. My blood boiled as I realized what she was saying. She was blaming this on me, on my body, on my manhood. After everything I had done for her, she had the nerve to throw that in my face. How small? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Jenny hesitated, biting her lip as more tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know. I mean, how small? I demanded, stepping closer, my hands balling into fists. She flinched, her voice barely above a whisper. 16 centimeters. 16 centimeters. That was what she considered small. That was the reason she had cheated on me. I could feel the rage building inside me, like a dam about to break. The betrayal, the humiliation, it was all too much. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest thing, an empty wine bottle from the coffee table, and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall with a deafening crash, the glass shattering into pieces. Jenny screamed, covering her face with her arms as she cowered on the floor. You think 16 centimeters is small? I shouted, my voice hoarse with fury. You think that's a reason to cheat? To betray me? She sobbed, her body shaking as she backed away, her voice barely audible. Please, Tom. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. But I didn't want to hear her apologies. I didn't want to hear anything. I lunged toward her, grabbing her by the arms and shaking her violently. You ruined everything. You threw away everything we had because of this? Because of some stupid comparison? She cried out, trying to pull away, but I was too far gone. I pushed her back onto the floor, towering over her as she lay there, trembling and helpless. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. All I felt was the burning rage, the unbearable humiliation that came with hearing the truth that no matter what I had done, no matter how hard I had tried, I had never been enough for her. I stood there, breathing heavily, my fists clenched, staring down at her as she sobbed uncontrollably. The image of her with Paul played over and over in my mind, each repetition stoking the fire of my anger. I could feel my control slipping, the urge to lash out consuming me. But then, something inside me snapped. Not in the way I expected. It was as if all the rage, all the fury, drained out of me in an instant, leaving nothing but emptiness. I stared down at Jenny, watching as she curled into herself, her sobs quieting into soft whimpers. I let out a shaky breath, stepping back. What was I doing? This wasn't me. I wasn't this kind of man. No matter what she had done, I wasn't going to become someone who hurt her like this. I wasn't going to let her betrayal turn me into a monster. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the floor. The video was still on my phone, still a weapon I could use against her and Paul. But in that moment, I didn't care. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but one thing was clear: our marriage was over. I stood outside the house, the cool night air doing nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. The bottle I had smashed still echoed in my ears. The sight of Jenny crumpled on the floor, sobbing, burned into my mind. I couldn't stay there any longer. Everything about our life, our home, it all felt like a sick joke now. The betrayal was so complete, So utterly soul-crushing that it left me with nothing but emptiness. I didn't know how long I stood out there, staring into the dark, trying to gather the shattered pieces of my thoughts. My hand instinctively tightened around my phone, the video of her and Paul still ready to be used as my weapon. But what was the point anymore? I had the power to ruin her, to expose her lies to the world, but where would that leave me? Eventually, I went back inside. The house was eerily quiet. Jenny wasn't in the living room where I had left her, but I could hear her muffled sobs coming from upstairs. I didn't care where she was. I had no interest in hearing more apologies or excuses. Instead, I walked into our bedroom, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. The rage had subsided, but what remained was a deep, crushing sadness. I thought about everything she had said. 16 centimeters. That's what it came down to for her. The realization made me sick. I heard her footsteps behind me, slow and hesitant. Jenny appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, her eyes swollen and red. She was shaking, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she stood there, not daring to come any closer. "Tom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please. I need to explain." I didn't look at her. I stared down at the floor, my voice cold and distant. "Explain what? That I'm not enough for you? That I've been a joke this whole time? Go ahead. Explain." She took a step closer, but I held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks. Just don't. Her lip quivered as she sank to her knees, sobbing again. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I did it. I was stupid. I was selfish. I just felt like something was missing." "Missing?" I repeated, my voice bitter. "What exactly was missing, Jenny? The money? The size? You could have talked to me. You could have told me you weren't happy, but instead, you went behind my back. You lied to me. Over and over again." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "It wasn't just about that. I didn't mean to hurt you, I swear. I never thought it would go this far." I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "You never thought it would go this far? You were screwing another man in a hotel room, Jenny. It doesn't get any further than that." She sobbed harder, crumbling under the weight of her own guilt. "Please, Tom, don't post the video. I'll do anything. Just don't ruin my life. I'll leave Paul, I swear. I'll do whatever you want." I stared at her, the desperation in her voice cutting through the thick fog of my anger. But her words, her begging, it didn't move me. Not anymore. She wasn't begging because she loved me. She wasn't pleading for our marriage. She was terrified of the consequences. Terrified of losing her reputation, her life, her comfort. And that's what stung the most. "You think I care about your life now?" I spat, the bitterness rising again. "You think I care about what happens to you and Paul? You threw us away. You destroyed everything we built because you wanted something more." Her head dropped, her sobs growing softer. I know I did. But I love you, Tom. Ido." I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You love me? You've been screwing another man for months, and you have the nerve to say you love me?" She looked up, her face pale, her hands shaking. "I don't know why I did it. I got lost. I thought I needed something else, but I was wrong. I don't want to lose you. Please, please don't leave me." I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. She was broken, pleading, desperate for me to forgive her. But what was left to save? Even if I could forgive her, how could I ever look at her the same way? How could I ever trust her again? I stepped closer, my voice low and calm, but filled with a cold finality. "It's too late, Jenny. You already lost me the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. This marriage, it's over." Her eyes widened, her sobs turning into panicked gasps. No, please don't do this. We can fix it. I'll do anything, Tom. I'll do anything to make it right." "There's nothing you can do," I replied, my voice empty. "I've already made up my mind." She scrambled to her feet, rushing toward me, grabbing my arm. "Please, Tom, I'll quit my job. I'll never see him again." I jerked my arm away from her, turning my back. "I don't want to hear it anymore. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Her sobs filled the room again, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The anger was gone now, replaced by a deep, gnawing sense of loss. This was the end of something I had fought so hard to protect. But now I realized it was never mine to save. Jenny had destroyed it long before I had ever known. I walked out of the room, the sound of her cries fading behind me. The phone with the video was still in my pocket, still waiting to be used. But as I stepped outside, I felt the weight of it lift just a little. I didn't need the video to ruin her. She had ruined herself. As I drove away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, I knew there was no going back. The life I had known, the marriage I had cherished, it was gone. And maybe, just maybe, I could start to rebuild something new.